For joining us this afternoon. I'm Pat Foy, Chairman and CEO of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. I'm joined today by transportation colleagues across the country. John Samuelson, International President of the TWU. Jeffrey Parker, CEO of the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority. Bob Powers, General Manager of San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit. John Costa, International President of the ATU. Kevin Corbett, the President and CEO of New Jersey Transit. Larry Willis, President of the Transportation Trades Department. And Leslie Richards, General Manager of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, SEPTA. We're here today representing some of the largest public transportation agencies across the country, joining with our brothers and sisters in the labor movement to call on the federal government to deliver additional robust federal aid in the next coronavirus relief package. Specifically here in New York at the MTA, we're calling on Congress to provide additional funding to the MTA of $3.9 billion, in addition to the funding received from the CARES Act, just to cover the COVID-19 related operating deficit at the MTA in 2020, and a total of $10.4 billion to cover the projected revenue declines, deficits in both 2020 and 2021. Those deficits are caused by precipitous revenue declines resulting from falling ridership and dramatically lower tax payments. The federal government must recognize the ongoing emergency and the vital role of transit and infrastructures as economic drivers, but also as agencies that transport first responders and essential workers during the pandemic. I want to be clear, this is a national disaster that requires a continued national response. The ongoing impacts of the pandemic are outpacing the historic levels of support previously included in the CARES Act. We need additional, all of our agencies need additional funding streams distributed not by the same old formulas, but based on needs stemming from this unprecedented health crisis. Our request has garnered substantial bipartisan support, as it did in the first round. This is not a red or blue state issue, it's a no-brainer. The COVID-19 pandemic has made clear the importance of public transportation during the pandemic and as part of the economic recovery when the pandemic subsides. Our workforces and our brothers and sisters in labor are the heroes moving the other heroes of this crisis, ensuring that other essential workers and first responders, such as doctors, nurses, pharmacists, grocers, food delivery workers, utility workers, and transit workers can do their jobs and save lives. And the sacrifices our workers have made are unimaginable. At the MTA in New York City, New York State, the epicenter of the pandemic, more than 100 heroes at the MTA have tragically lost their lives. New York and the nation forever owes them a debt of gratitude, and there is nothing that ever can make up for these losses. We mourn and grieve with the families of each of them. At the same time, we can honor their legacy by investing in the systems they dedicated their lives to. Ridership at the MTA continues to plummet, along with the loss of dedicated taxes and subsidies that support our operations right now. Our costs also continue to rise with the new normal of 24/7 cleaning and disinfecting. The MTA commissioned a study by McKinsey & Company, which projects the full impact on the MTA to be between $7 and $8.5 billion for 2020 alone, dwarfing our initial estimates, which were made before Governor Cuomo put New York State on pause. The nearly $4 billion in emergency funding directed to the MTA in the CARES Act is not nearly enough, not even just for 2020. In addition, the cost of borrowing for agencies such as the MTA is significantly higher than it was a few months ago, making it more difficult and more expensive for us to borrow money to survive this crisis. And we still need to refinance existing debt in the meantime. We want to continue to rely on self-help, but we need substantial additional federal support as a bridge. We cannot rely on drawing funds from our capital budget to get through this crisis. History has proven that deferring critical maintenance and capital project is terrible for our systems in the long term. And in New York, we refuse to return the MTA to the MTA of the 1970s and 1980s. The $26 billion included in the CARE Act, the $25 billion included in the first round of the CARES Act has started flowing and has been critical to continuing service during this crisis. However, it would slow and impede post-pandemic recovery were our agencies not to receive the amounts that we've requested. Anything less would be a disservice to the essential workers who have relied on mass transit during this crisis and the American people who rely on public transportation to get them from home to work to school and to carry us all through this crisis and propel our local economies forward. Thanks for your attention. I'll now turn the virtual microphone to John Samuelson, International President of the TWU. John.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Pat kind of covered a whole lot of talking points right there nationally. I'm sure much of what everybody's going to say is kind of encapsulated by his comments. But certainly the crisis has brought into extreme clarity the national significance of public transit. It's also brought into extreme clarity that public transit is the circulatory system of the fight back against COVID-19. Absolutely, for sure. Just get in the transit system in any given city and you'll see blue-collar Americans going to fight this COVID-19 on the front lines every day, being delivered by transit workers. So $32 billion is not a significant ask. It seems like a significant number, but it's certainly not a significant ask to bail out public transit systems across the country, to stand up for the blue-collar Americans that use this system to get to work every day, and to stand up for the blue-collar heroes that are the transit workers city by city across this country. Certainly, the U.S. government has bailed out Wall Street in the midst of many crises. They bailed out major corporations, profiteering corporations in the midst of many crises, and they can step up right now and bail out public transit and recognize it for the nationally important role that we play every day in both, again, the response to this pandemic and in the post-pandemic economic recovery. So thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeffrey Parker from MARTA.
Thanks, John. I appreciate being able to have the opportunity to talk with this group of my colleagues, and I really want to make sure that I thank and point out the hard work that the unionized workforce who have been moving people throughout this country here in Atlanta, and I'm so glad that we have members of union leadership here with us today. Each of our transit agencies have different challenges in front of us. We heard some staggering numbers from our friends in New York, and we'll hear some more staggering numbers. And whether it's a large transit agency on the West Coast or East Coast, or a smaller transit agency in Middle America, we're all going to face significant challenges going forward. And while it's all going to be different story, we all have different ways that we're funded, whether it's sales tax or property tax. Transit has a whole variety of ways that we're funded. We are, as was said, a critical component to the economic vitality of the regions that we serve. Metro Atlanta is one of the fastest growing regions in the country right now. We've had a significant decline in our rail ridership, only about a 30-40% decline in our bus ridership, and we're working hard, and the unionized workforce is working hard to move these important workers to hospitals and throughout the city. So we recognize that we are clearly part of the economic development and making sure that we can recover, keep our regions moving, and with that, we've got to recognize that we will have impacts going in the future. So with that, I'd like to thank the group and turn it over to my friend and colleague, Bob Powers, the General Manager of BART in San Francisco. Bob?
Thanks, Jeff. So I'm Bob Powers. I am the general manager at the San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit System, better known as BART. So the Bay Area helps drive the fifth largest economy of the world, the fifth largest economy in the world. That's impressive. It's innovative, it's diversified, and it's a powerhouse that's going to lead the way to a revival. Here in the Bay Area, our public transportation system has been brought to its knees by COVID-19. Our ridership is about 7% of what it was just 3 months ago, and it means that our budget is deep in the red. BART is facing approximately $600 million in budget deficits when I combine the current year and the next fiscal year, $600 million. And unfortunately, ridership is not going to pay those bills. BART isn't accustomed to outside help, but now we must have it. We are profoundly grateful for the leadership of Congress and Speaker Pelosi for prioritizing transit in the first CARES Act. It gave us what we needed to keep the system, to keep our doors open, and to provide ridership and transit for essential workers and to avoid layoffs. But for the economy to recover, BART and public transit in general must be there, and we can't afford to be reactive, not BART or any other transit agency. We must be up and fully functioning to deliver. And for BART, that's 3 musts. We must keep our greatest assets, that's our employees, healthy and safe. We must operate a thoroughly clean and disinfected transit system, and we must put out frequent service. BART and public transportation must be the first choice to avoid gridlock that would slow economic recovery. A recent survey predicts that if too many people opt out of transit for their cars instead of transit, commute times would more than double in the San Francisco Bay Area, and that's the highest increase throughout the U.S. We've made great strides to get folks out of their cars and into transit. We can't trigger deep cuts that is only going to unravel our ability to move people. 2 last things I'd like to end on. Look, an investment in transit is an investment in the economy, it's an investment in people, it's an investment in jobs, and it's investment in the environment. We are hopeful that Congress will include transit in the next CARES Act funding package, and look forward to this discussion. So I would like now to introduce John Costa, who is the International President of the Amalgamated Transit Union, and BART train operators and station agents are represented by local ATU 1555. John.
Thank you, Bob. Hello, everybody. Normally, we're on the other side of the fence on many of these issues, but this one, we're on the same page. If we're going to keep our cities and our economy going, we're going to need more money. The money that we have now has stopped the overcrowding, has kept the riding public safer, and our operators and our employees and our members safer. But it's not enough. If we're going to reopen, we're going to need more money. We're going to need the riders to feel safe to come back on board, and that's going to take my members feeling safe to move the equipment, John's members to move the equipment. And if we're not feeling safe, I don't think the riding public will be there. So thank you, Congress, for the first CARES Act, but we need a lot more. The agencies cannot sustain this. The fare boxes are done. The sales tax is done. We shut down. As we open, we're going to need the money. And if we don't get the money, the cities will not come back. The economy won't come back. It'll be all over with. Very simple. Thank you, everybody. And with that, I'd like to introduce the president and CEO of the agency I come from, the great in New Jersey Transit. I'm sorry.
Kevin Corbett is next.
Kevin Corbett, thank you.
Thank you,
From the
John.
great state of New Jersey.
Yeah,
Thank
Kevin,
you.
sorry.
Thank you very much. All right, John. I was going to say nice things about you now. Just teasing. Now, John certainly is one of our own, having originally served, coming up through ATU Local 819, and then served as our state council chair here. Certainly, John, a lot of praise goes to the ATU, obviously working close with Ray and, the rest of the team. What we have seen here in that recovery, everything working with union to help get PPE when it was really short in the beginning, things like that were really very helpful and showed the good teamwork that we have with the ATU and our other unions. And it's certainly a source of pride for New Jersey Transit to have John as the head of the International. I'd like to thank all my colleagues across the country, along with labor leaders, for coming together to address what, as Pat said, is an existential threat to public transportation. I would also, at this point, I'd like to highlight how real this is about frontline employees, as well as throughout the organization. We have had 9 members of New Jersey Transit family who have lost their lives to this invisible enemy, and we certainly are extremely grateful for their service. I'd like to thank all our nearly 12,000 employees, and particularly those on the front line who have kept the system moving. As we all say, it is the backbone of not just our economy, which it is, but also for the essential public services. As Pat said, it's heroes moving heroes during this crisis. There's no secret that COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating financial impact on all of us. Nowhere have those impacts, I think, been greater than in the New Jersey, New York metropolitan region. And the CARES Act resources certainly provided a critical, though temporary, funding bridge to ensure we could continue to provide essential transit for the healthcare professionals, the first responders, and other essential workers. But it clearly was just to cover a period of time, and that was initial reaction to the situation. However, since the last few months, when we've written to our congressional delegation, a fuller understanding of the impact is emerging. As the public health crisis only continues to worsen, we're seeing here the financial impact on transit agencies, including New Jersey Transit, has continued to escalate. As an indication, we thought originally our ridership would be down 90%, which was unimaginable at the time, and as similar to several others, is down below a 95% cut. So there are a number of impacts like that we've been digesting. And as Pat mentioned, transit is so critical to our economies. We cannot afford to go back to the era where transit systems were on the verge of collapse. New Jersey Transit, ourselves, we're just coming out of what had been a decade of disinvestment before I got here 2 years ago, and we're making progress. And to lose that, and as we're starting to make up for lost ground, this could be a real body blow. At this point, I think for most states, the full impact of the state budgets are unknown this time, but we certainly know that they will be significant. New Jersey Transit is heavily reliant on state support for our operating expenses. And really, that's, I think, what brings us here today. Our mass transit systems are the underpinning of respective economies. And I can tell you, at least in New Jersey's case, it's absolutely, we move nearly 1 million people a day. We're the most densely populated state in the country. To not have a fully functional and operating robust transit system as we recover would have significant impacts through all aspects of living in the state and to serving the metropolitan region, both New York and Philadelphia, from the commuter shed that's so critical for our regional economy here. So we certainly look forward to working with our federal representatives alongside with our colleagues and leaders from labor here today. And we need to ensure we have the critical funding to continue to deliver that same service as we had beforehand. With that, I'd like to turn it over now to the president of the TTD, Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO, Larry Willis. Larry certainly, we go back, the TTD coalition of 33 member unions, many of which are within New Jersey Transit, including the ATU, SMART, TD, and the TCU. With that, Larry, take it away.
Thanks, Kevin. And you're right. I think the broader perspective and coalition that we bring to the table is important, and we're proud to support this request and specifically John Cost and John Samuelson on the labor side want to associate my comments with theirs and support, I think, the good observations that have been already made on this call. You know, from our perspective, we know that public transportation workers across the country are putting their lives on the line to carry essential workers to and from their jobs. We're talking about nurses and doctors, law enforcement, first responders, on down to grocery store workers who help us all put food on the table. And that's why keeping our public transportation system operational is not just a luxury. It is a necessity for the physical and economic well-being of this country. Unfortunately, it is becoming increasingly clear that the economic impact of COVID-19 is taking a far larger toll on this country and this industry than previously anticipated. A significant infusion of additional federal funding, what we're talking about on this call today, we know is needed for transit systems to remain operational for the foreseeable future. This funding has never been more critical. For the frontline workers whose last line of defense are the gloves and face masks that are essential to keeping them safe, for the riders whose faith in public transportation will be grounded in knowing that buses and rail cars are being cleaned regularly into the highest federal standards, and for the health of our economy as this country begins to reopen. With unemployment levels at record highs, we need every tool to go back to work and to bring this country back online. We simply cannot do it without the vital service that public transit provides. With that, I am happy to introduce Leslie Richards, General Manager of SEPTA.
Thank you, Larry. Good afternoon, and as you have heard from my colleagues, this is an unprecedented time for the nation and certainly for public transportation. Like has already been shared by many others, this pandemic has hit us in heartbreaking ways here at SEPTA. We've lost 7 members of our SEPTA family, and over 250 employees have tested positive. Our actions from our frontline employees and our unions have been nothing short of heroic. And each agency's experiences have and will be different, but I think they all share the same common priorities: the health and safety of our workforce and customers, providing critical transportation to essential workers and those needing to access life-sustaining services, and returning to service strong and ready to support our regions in recovery. In the face of devastating revenue losses, we are only positioned to meet these priorities because of the CARES Act. And I want to thank our entire congressional delegation for their quick response to SEPTA's needs and for including vital assistance for the nation's hard-hit transit agencies. SEPTA faces a wide range of financial challenges that are difficult to calculate, including staggering fare box revenue and ridership losses, the prolonged impact on sources of state and local operating and capital subsidies, and costs related to ongoing and future social distancing, vehicle and station sanitizing, and employee screening and virus testing protocols. SEPTA service is the engine of southeastern Pennsylvania, which alone accounts for 42% of Pennsylvania's economic output. SEPTA's ability to meet the transportation needs of our region will determine how quickly and fully the state recovers from this crisis. While we continue to evaluate the long-term impacts, we know recovery will require the full amount of CARES Act funding and sustained actions from all levels of government, including additional direct federal assistance. Similar to recovery funding following a natural disaster, direct assistance based on demonstrated needs would target assistance to more effectively address COVID-related revenue losses and expenses for the hardest hit transit agencies like SEPTA. And because right now the unknowns far outnumber the knowns, this type of assistance would provide a measure of operating security by creating a critical safety net once expenses and revenue losses exceed CARES Act funding levels, and we know that is going to happen. Our region and SEPTA in particular have been profoundly affected by this crisis, and yet every day our essential workers are making it possible for other essential workers to serve the region. In closing, I just want to thank SEPTA's frontline workforce for leading the region in this crisis, and I could not be more proud. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you. We're joined by reporters from all across the country. We've got a couple of requests for those folks. If you could use the electronic hand-raising feature on your Zoom dials there so we know that you're looking to ask a question, that would be helpful. And if you want to direct your questions to a specific speaker, it would be helpful if you would say that so that our 8 folks around the country who have been speaking just now will know that you're looking to hear from them. All right? With that, we're going to start with Andrew Siff of WNBC New York. Andrew.
Thanks, Tim, and hello to everyone on the call. My question is about social distancing on trains. Paris Metro has already blocked off alternating seats and placed markers on for where people should stand. I wonder, for starting with the MTA, but for any of the railroad chiefs here, any of the train systems, how close are we to implementing social distancing on trains, and do you envision this being mandatory when riders return?
So, Andrew, it's Pat Foy. I'll kick it off, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues, both at agencies and management, who want to speak to the issue. At the MTA, we've been looking at what agencies in Asia, Europe, and North America have been doing on this crucial issue, which goes to the safety of both customers and employees. We have not reached any decision. We've also reached out to the trade associations in transit, SEPTA, as well as UITP, for their advice. We're consulting with public health officials, academics, et cetera, and on this important issue, no decision has been raised. We are involving our union colleagues here on these issues, and when we've made a decision and when Governor Cuomo begins to lift pieces of New York on pause downstate, we'll be coming back to our employees, our customers, the board, the public, and the media. Any of my colleagues want to speak to the issue?
Yeah, it's Bob Powers with BART. I would just like to add two other pieces to add from BART's perspective there. In addition to what New York said, we continue to run all 10-car trains, which is the maximum train length that we have in the system that our platforms can handle, to address the social distancing. Then the other piece we're doing right now is very sophisticated modeling of increasing service, putting out more service, back to the why we need additional funds here, more service and spreading the peak hour longer to provide for that social distancing. We're running that modeling right now as a part of, the health impacts and social distancing.
I would say SEPTA is doing similar things with rider limits, as well as looking at capacity. Definitely, we're looking at running our system at 50% or less and adding vehicles, expanding service, just as been mentioned as well, and working directly with our unions. We're going to develop this together and see what is best for the future here. But we know that social distancing is something that has played a very important role for all of us as we flatten the curve and we slow the spread, and it has to be part of our future modeling.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, let me just quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, let me just quick. Go ahead, Kevin.
Sorry. I just say from a New Jersey perspective, we had an executive order that we limit capacity to 50%. It's hard to get, the ideal 6 foot. Obviously, the mass and mass transit sort of works against that. But we have it working with labor, and particularly under the guidance of our Department of Health, and following, how we could best practices. We're doing the rear door entry on buses, where if they have those buses, 50% capacity on a Navy bus, maybe 60 people, on an articulated longer bus, 100. So you cut that in half. We have flexibility in bus to be able to add more buses, on certain routes if we see recovery on the peaks. A rail car, same thing. We have 10-car consist, and that's less of a problem right now with ridership. We have to make sure people do distribute, that they don't bunch up in one car. But I really see the challenge as people come back to work. Right now in New Jersey, it's still essential people only going to work. But as the economy comes up, that's going to be a real challenge that all of us are facing. And like Pat, we're working both within SEPTA on a national level, and my other colleagues here, as well as with UITP, the international group, on what's best practices. But a lot of that's going to be led by, as we reopen businesses, by what the healthcare guidance as well.
All right, and we're moving on now. Again, I would ask the reporters if you could identify who you'd like to answer the question. My guess is that Leslie Richards may get attention here, because the next question is from Patricia Maudet of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Patricia.
Leslie, I just wanted to see if you could elaborate on how much more money SEPTA is seeking in federal relief, and if you could elaborate on how SEPTA has worked with Pennsylvania's congressional delegation on the issue.
Sure. Well, when I mentioned in my comments, it's tough to calculate. We know we're going to be hundreds of millions short just on revenue this year. And we anticipate it for next year as well as the following year. So this is not something that is going to come to a quick end just after this fiscal year that we're about to enter into. As you know, Pat, our funding is 50% state. We do also count on 37% at the revenue box, which is almost down, to zero right now, because, the majority of our system, in order to help us with social distancing, in order to help us serve our essential trips right now. Our buses currently are free, as well as our regional rail. And so the revenue, hopefully will slowly come back. The state has been hit very hard, and depending on them for 50% of our funding, a lot of unknowns there. We continue to talk to them. As well as our counties, to provide a local match. And so, Philadelphia, Montgomery County, Bucks County, Chester, Delaware, they need to fully fund us in order for the state to fully fund us. And we know that all of the counties have also been hit very hard. And so there are just so many unknowns. We anticipate to be well over the $644 million that came in that will help us with some operating expenses in the CARES Act funding. And, we are going to need more help, obviously, to give us some financial stability moving forward. Of course, as all of those numbers, become available to us, as we look at our capital program, as we look at our budgetary needs in the future, as we look at how we don't even know how the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is going to solve their budget. And as we know, their budget comes to a close at the end of June. And looking forward, it is just a lot of moving targets here. And we know that the crisis is rapidly evolving, as well as the need for funding. So we anticipate that the conversations in the future will not only be about what can we count on or not count on of our funding, our current partners, but what does funding for transit even look like in the future? We have been operating as an essential service. It's been clear for the last several weeks. And so we need to look at and see, how do essential services get funded, and what would make sense for us moving forward. So of course, we'll keep you in tune as all the numbers are becoming available. But like I said, we are hundreds of millions behind this fiscal year, which ends in January 30th of this year, June 30th of this year. We will be hundreds of millions next year, and we anticipate that in the following fiscal year as well.
All right, and Bob Powers, you may want to have your ears ready here because the next question is from Michael Cabanatuan of the San Francisco Chronicle. Michael.
Good morning. Yeah, Michael Cabanatuan at the Chronicle. I was wondering the same thing. What is BART going to be asking for specifically in this request, both for the current, to get through the current budget year and also in the budget year that starts July 1st? And is there kind of an overall ask for all transit in the country?
So, Michael, Bob Powers with BART. So BART's deficit, 2-year deficit for us to land FY20, which is the end of June, this June, and then combine that with FY21, which would be July through the following June, our deficit is around $600 million. And a portion of that will be picked up by the funding from the first CARES Act. That's why it is so critical to the Bay Area and public transportation that there is funding in the next CARES Act coming out of Congress. And so then as for the second part of that, I think I'm going to push that over to New York City and ask, to answer that question, what is the global ask there?
Well, the global ask is in the neighborhood of $33 billion, which John Samuelson, the international president of the TWU, I think noted correctly, is given the importance of public transit and the effect on a national basis to the economy, to jobs, et cetera, is actually a modest number. Speaking for the MTA ask is, as I mentioned, $3.9 billion on top of round one. Each of the agencies on the phone today, on the Zoom today, has been affected in different ways. But the effect of the pandemic on each of our agencies, our customers and employees has been dramatic. And frankly, as Leslie Richards, from SEPTA said, this is unprecedented, both in terms of the cause of the revenue declines, the ridership declines, the declines in dedicated taxes and subsidies, and the effect it's had on each of our agencies.
All right, we're going to stay in New York with David Meyer of the New York Post. David, you're up.
Yeah, my question is for Pat. Pat, are layoffs or furloughs on the table, and why or why not?
David, we are the $3.9 billion that the MTA has requested is to allow us for the remainder of 2020 to keep the lights on and to keep the MTA operating. Other than the transformation, which we put on pause in March, which contemplated reductions in management ranks, most of which would be many of which would be from attrition. There is no plan at this time for layoffs or furloughs beyond the reduction, again, that was contemplated in transformation. We need every person at the MTA and every MTA agency in terms of responding to the pandemic and providing the level of service that we are providing in this unprecedented, challenging time.
And on to Samantha Maldonado of Politico, New Jersey. Samantha.
Hi, yes. This is a question for Kevin Corbett, and I'm also asking what the request from New Jersey Transit is on top of the previous CARE Act funding.
Sure, Samantha, we're not quite there yet. We're working with our Treasury Department and ourselves in finalizing that number. We should have it very soon, imminent to come out. I'd say it's roughly proportional if you look at the MTA and where they came out with the initial request, and for ourselves, what we came out at that first blush, it is roughly proportional to what I see the MTA and some of the other colleagues here are asking for. But the exact number we'll have for that fairly soon.
Meaning, sorry, just to clarify, exactly proportional to what you previously asked, meaning like 1.7 or whatever it was, 1.4?
No, I think, if I look at New York, their initial MTA request, ours was less proportion, less because they're a larger system. So, if I look at the request now, we're in that sort of, as a percentage of what our first request was, it'll be roughly in that area.
Okay.
And next is Christina Goldbaum of the New York Times. Christina.
Hi, my question is for Pat. Pat, I'm wondering, in March you had said that cleaning estimates around, I think, 400 or 500 million. I'm wondering now that, you're cleaning and disinfecting each night, if you have a new cost estimate for how much that'll cost the MTA this year.
Christina, I don't. The subway shut down from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. As you know, we're in the 6th day of that. That started Wednesday of last week. I can clearly tell you that the disinfecting program that we're going through, every piece of rolling stock, every bus, every station, subways, buses, Metro North, Long Island Railroad, bridges and tunnels, the unplanned expenses compared to our financial plan, which our board approved in December of last year, is going to be ongoing and substantial.
All right, and again, a reminder, the reporters use the electronic hand raiser if you want to ask a question. And Larry Higgs' hand is up from the Star Ledger in New Jersey and Newark. Larry.
How you doing? Thanks for taking the question. It's a two-part question. I was wondering if somebody could explain how this would work differently than the distribution of the CARES Act funding, because I understand that was basically awarded on the basis of population. And the what-if question, what happens if you are funded at less than the $32 to $33 billion ask?
It's Kevin Corbett, Larry, or Pat, you want to?
Kevin, I want you to lead off since Larry's a New Jersey reporter, and then I'll try to finish up.
Yeah, I think, Larry, we're looking at the practices, all of us on the call, of what's the most effective way to get that, where there's accountability, but there's also where we can plan accordingly and make sure we have the funding in a timely manner. Working with the congressional delegation on that, I'd look to Congress on that as far as what's the most effective way. Do we have to tweak that, rather based on formula funding? There are other vehicles, other programs that may be more optimal from our point, while still giving U.S. DOT and Congress and the White House confidence that the money is being properly spent and invested in.
Larry, I'd address the second part of your question in the following way. I think a failure of the federal government, and I do want to acknowledge the extraordinary work that Senator Schumer, the majority leader, and Speaker Pelosi has done on the first round, and we expect on a bipartisan basis their support and leadership going forward. I think were our agencies not to be funded at these levels, there's an immediate impact and then a longer-term impact. The immediate impact would be a significant negative effect on our ability to continue to carry first responders and essential employees during the pendency of the pandemic, and that would be obviously a terrible result. The longer-term impact would be slowing and stunting the economic recovery and the job creation and the productivity increases that we're going to need out of our local, regional, and national economy and public transit across the nation, from New York to San Francisco to Atlanta to Philadelphia, across the entire country. Mass transit is going to play a significant role in the economic recovery, and not funding at these levels will slow and stunt the economic recovery and result in the creation of fewer jobs and an economy that will continue to lag. That's a terrible thing for each of our agencies, but it's also a terrible thing for our nation.
Pat, could I just add quickly to that? So just,
please.
APTA recently put out a press release where they're asking for, I think it's close to $24 billion in funding for transit. And to answer your question about, the CARES Act, it was distributed through the formula system, which is largely by ridership and population. I think the industry is having a big discussion about making sure that any sort of future funding is really trying to deal with revenue loss, any sort of, whether it's sales tax, fare box, or any sort of funding source, and making sure that we're, as an industry, dealing with the revenue shortfalls that are coming out of these of this virus.
And next up, sorry, go ahead. Somebody else, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Larry Willis with Transportation Trade. Just on the impact side of this, I mean, obviously, frontline transit workers are really important jobs in communities across the country. We know they make good wages and good benefits, quite frankly, in large part because of the unions that we represent and that are on this call as well. So when you see a cutback in what the level of funding would be in the next bill, those are jobs that are going to be at risk and benefits that are going to be at risk. We also know that up to 37,000 construction jobs could be put at risk this year if we don't do something about this funding stream. And quite frankly, we know that investments in public transit also help on the manufacturing side and other sectors of transportation in our broader economy. So a lot of negative impacts happen. Capacity of transit agencies, their ability to maintain operations when the economy does start to, roll back here a little bit. So that's why we've been fighting so hard on this, and why I think it's important that Congress responds in a positive way.
All right, we've got just a few minutes left. We're going to go to Courtney Rosen of Bloomberg, then over to Alfonso Castillo at Newsday. We'll wrap it up in San Francisco. So Courtney Rosen, you're up.
Hi, good afternoon, and thanks for holding this press conference. So they were talking about earlier the distribution of funding of the $32 billion ask that you're asking of Congress and the Federal Transit Administration. Can you talk about more if you want that money distributed differently than the money that came under the CARES Act, the $25 billion? How do you want that money given out? And is it do you want different factors taken into account on the distribution?
Yeah, look, the traditional formulas, speaking for the MTA, and I'll let my colleagues speak for themselves, but I think this is a shared view. The traditional formulas don't work in general, but they particularly don't work during this pandemic. For instance, the epicenter of the pandemic is New York City and New York State, as well as New Jersey. We all see that from the statistics that are published on the news shows every morning, afternoon, and evening. And surely it should be the case that that ridership ought to be taken into account, the effect of the pandemic on each of our agencies, which has been significant. And using the traditional funding formulas don't work. The amount that I believe, and I'll let my colleagues again speak for themselves, that in aggregate public transit agencies should receive is the $33 billion that I mentioned, and not the lower number that was in the APTA letter rather. We think APTA for its service and its advocacy, but this is a case because of the uniqueness of the pandemic and the unique adverse effect it's had on public transit, our customers and our employees. A different approach ought to be undertaken this time.
All right, anybody else want to jump in on that before we go on to Alfonso?
I would just like to add from just another filter there, the urgency. As we work with our congressional delegation in Congress and the leadership there, the urgency of getting this funding and getting it out to the operators, to the transit agencies in a timely fashion. I can't stress that enough.
And Alfonso Castillo, Newsday on Long Island. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for doing this. A question for Pat. So under the biennial fare increase schedule, the MTA board would be due to vote later this year on the latest 4% fare increase. Does receiving this latest round of funding, this latest $3.9 billion from the federal government, affect that plan one way or the other? And is the MTA considering any specific changes to fare policy because of the pandemic either acknowledging that there are a lot fewer people riding the system now, so maybe the typical fare increase doesn't go as far. And also, I know there's been some consideration by experts talking about the potential of using fares to encourage and discourage ridership during certain times of the day.
So, Alfonso, let me take a shot at your the three parts of your question. One is it's important to understand the cause of the ask that our agencies are making today. The pandemic has caused precipitous drops in ridership. We are all reliant to a greater or lesser extent on fare revenue and in some cases toll revenue, and that has fallen precipitously. I'm not going to go through all of the agencies, but at subways, New York City Transit subways, ridership's down 92%. You're from Newsday, so you know that ridership at the Long Island Railroad has been down 97% almost consistently every day. And the other decline, right, is the precipitous decline in dedicated taxes and subsidies that the state legislature has put in place over a period of time, local, state, and regional taxes. And those roughly are 50% each of the MTA's revenue. The revenue mix for my colleagues on the Zoom today differs, but we've each encountered a significant and precipitous decline in ridership, and obviously a significant negative adverse effect on the toll on the taxes and subsidies we receive from various governments. Point one. Point two: no decision's has been made with respect to fare policy. A fare policy review as a policy matter was underway prior to the pandemic. Point three I would make is we are obviously talking to our internal planning folks and others outside, including advocates and academics and others, about what ought to be done, not only with respect to, for instance, subways and buses, but also toll policy, et cetera, and that discussion is ongoing. And the last thing I'd want to say on behalf of, I think, each of my colleagues is thanks to the members of the media for joining today, but also thanks to the President for signing the first bill for the Senate Majority Leader and Senate Minority Leader, the Speaker and the Minority Leader in the House. And the message today is that our agencies, which are critical to the ongoing recovery and response to the pandemic, but just as importantly to the national economy, not funding us at the levels that we've suggested, and each agency has got a different ask, of course, will slow and stunt the national recovery that we're all going to need when the pandemic subsides.
All right, we're going to wrap it up with Michael at the San Francisco Chronicle. Michael, you're up.
You already had me. I'm good. Thank you.
Very good. Then we'll have a chance to go quickly to Michelle Kasky in New York. Michelle is at Bloomberg.
Great. Thank you for the call. And Pat, if you could please clarify, earlier you were talking about the MTA is asking for about $3.9 billion in this latest ask, but you were also talking about 10 or 10.4 billion of help that's needed to cover lost revenue. Could you clarify exactly what exactly you need from the federal government and how much you're exactly asking from the federal government?
So here's the way it works. In round one, we received approximately $3.9 billion in CARES 1. We expect to receive some of that funding literally this week. Our second ask now is $3.9 billion for the MTA, and what that will do is get us through the remainder of the year and deal with the precipitous decline in revenue caused by the ridership decline and a significant reduction in dedicated taxes and subsidies. That will get us through 2020, and each of my colleagues on the phone will have a different math and a different cause and effect, because we've each got different funding streams. We will need a total, this is based on the McKinsey advice, a total of $10.4 billion to cover the projected deficits in both 2020 and 2021. And obviously, sitting here today in the middle of May, in the midst of the pandemic, those numbers may change for the MTA and perhaps for other agencies. But sitting here right now, that's the math.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks to our speakers from New York. Good afternoon to Philadelphia, New Jersey, Atlanta, and good morning to San Francisco. Thanks to everybody across the country for joining us today.
Thanks to each of our agency colleagues and our union partners, labor partners for joining us today. Thanks everybody.